Well, it's Feisty Fridays again, and I skipped a Friday. Last weekend was Easter weekend, and I trust that many of you enjoyed a wonderful holiday weekend. Some of us don't recognize Easter, and I recognize that. I think most of us, depending on where you live, probably enjoyed just having an extra day or so that felt like a different vibe. I know for me, Good Friday, as it's called in the Easter tradition, often used to be a day where I would hang out with family, and I did, and it was wonderful. But the last time I was with you, I was in New York City in Times Square, really excited to share this collaborative book that I had the honor to be written up with. It's a fantastic kind of 365 day of the year leadership book on resilience. And it was interesting to take last week off and to think about resilience. I have been writing on a regular basis, obviously on LinkedIn, about different things than resilience, although connected to resilience. And this last week, I wrote about comfort. And I wanted to talk about comfort because I recognize there are a lot of professionals that I work with that I am involved in project teams with that really look for decision making to feel comfortable before they proceed. And I want to have respect for that because I tend to be, I tend to have a high change tolerance. And in the midst of enjoying change and the opportunity to change, sometimes I can create discomfort where it's unnecessary. But I really think that there's a quiet kind of shift in leadership happening. And I think some of it comes from celebrating decisiveness and certainty in a way that we have been able to, maybe even pre-global pandemic, that now we can't. And it feels like we're maybe in a pendulum swing because we're finding ways to create space for empathy, kindness, inclusion, care, psychological safety. These are really important things. But sometimes creating space for those, I think, is getting lost in comfort. What is comfortable? And, comfort in leadership, I don't know that there's a lot of times where we should feel comfortable in leadership. And I think sometimes comfort in leadership is just control in a socially acceptable, and I use the term outfit. I don't know what it is about outfit and putting on things, but it feels like a good example to give when I'm trying to relate some of these theories, both to myself and also when I share it with the rest of the world. But I talked about being nice in my post last week. And first of all, I am a Canadian. I was born and raised in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and I live in Canada. And we have this global reputation of being nice. And I just want to kind of crack open the nice part a little bit and make sure that as it relates to leadership, we really don't strive to be Canadian or nice. And I use the term Canadian as like a, verb or an adjective because I think sometimes we just have that reputation. People go, "Oh, Canadian, you guys are so nice." But what does it really mean? If you watch closely, there's a lot of leaders right now that are using language in a way to avoid inciting discomfort. And I think a lot of times it's like we push things off because we don't want to deal with the conflict that we believe it will incite. And I am very passionate about language in a professional context. I want to be cautious about the words I choose, mostly because many times I have used words that have created people's reaction. Oftentimes I have incited negative reaction with the words I've used, and I don't want to do that. I want to be conscious. However, I don't want to choose harmony over honesty. And as a leader, this is really hard. And as a Canadian, we are seen as nice. And I think a lot of people believe our niceness and I will just speak for myself, not for the whole country. My niceness as a Canadian does not come from my niceness and my gentleness about everything that's going on in the world. I actually have very strong, highly friction opinions, but I don't maybe share them the same way that perhaps some of my other global citizens might. I tend to put on nice first. And nice for me, a lot of times is it's a performance. I am performing niceness because in the room, I don't want to go there. And I think, specifically, and I don't want to delve too much, but I think in my own analysis of this as being a Canadian, I think it comes from the fact that as Canadians, we are still a part of the British Empire. We are a constitutional monarchy and we still have a king. And as much as that may not play out on a day-to-day basis as a Canadian, because we technically still are a democratic society and we vote and we have elections, we have this constitutional monarchy set up, which connects us to the British Empire. And the British Empire, nice is really important. Decorum, walking in a room and presenting yourself appropriately, caring about etiquette, caring about how people see you. This is very much a mentality that I think comes from the British Empire. It's not all bad, but it isn't real all the time. I think, even as you see the crown right now out of Britain, the crown is starting to show sides of itself that we've never seen, which is it's human because it's always been about decorum and propriety and presenting always, I don't know, perfect. And you and I both know the crown has never been perfect, but it's been presented in the world as perfect. And it is this performance. It's a theatrical performance and it erases humanity and it values the way you appear over the way you really think. And this is what I'm getting at when I say I don't want to be a nice leader. I want to be feisty enough to recognize that if comfort is control, if comfort feels good in the moment because we have no friction, no pushback, no emotional charges in the room, but what it really means under the surface is that we don't agree. We are delaying decisions that we know really need to happen because we don't want to fight about it. We're going to accept less performance because we recognize it's keeping the peace. We don't want to create accountability loops because that might incite conflict. And so we don't hold accountability. It literally creates danger in our teams and in our leadership. It creates danger because it allows people and leaders to avoid the very responsibility that we have, which is as leaders, we have agreed silently in some cases, but some of you have signed on the dotted line as a manager or as a leader in the role that you have, that you will not do that. Leadership, by definition, means we will not be nice. That does not mean we cannot be kind at all times. Kindness and niceness are not the same thing. Nice is the performance of. Kindness means we are going to deal with what's necessary, but we are going to do it in an appropriate, professional, and yes, socially acceptable, but kind way. If you have to give feedback to someone, there is a kind way to give that feedback. Avoiding giving them the feedback is not kind because what we do is we extend the likelihood that that behavior is going to continue, and that can create even more trauma, more toxicity. I feel like a lot of us are tempted to protect ourselves as leaders, to say the right words, but not mean those words. And that's not leadership. That's choosing comfort and self-protection over the role. And it's funny because I've never yet worked on a team that's perfect. So project teams, work teams, organizations, none of them are perfect. The wisest teams I've ever been with have been the honest ones. The ones that don't admit that everything's fine. The ones that when I come into the office or when I am on a Zoom call and I ask how you doing, I get an honest answer. I get things aren't great. X and Y and Z are not good. Great. Um, if I've been on a team where people have been saying, I'm fine, let's get on to the work. Something's there that isn't actually fine. And, we need to be people who don't edit ourselves in those moments. We need to be people that find conscious, appropriate, respectable ways to communicate what we're really feeling. FINE is an acronym: effed up, insecure, neurotic, and emotional. And we need to be cautious not to hide those feelings that are legitimate behind this theatrical performance. Leaders, we need to step away from theater and we need to be clear. We need to be clear, and we also need to create care because, care is not the absence of discomfort. Care is actually the willingness to be in the conversation even when it's uncomfortable. And, sometimes I have wanted to avoid this. Oftentimes I want to avoid this with my children, with my, family members. And I recognize that it costs me in the long run because the sooner I can communicate honestly and consciously and kindly about what I'm really feeling, the faster things will move. Um, I really believe that we can hold respect for one another and tension at the same time. But it takes both parties to do that. And it takes strong leadership to create an environment where when truth is being spoken, even if it creates discomfort, it's okay. So we need to, as leaders, I need to, as a leader, ask some questions. I need to ask my questions that I put in my newsletter last week. Like, where am I right now in my life choosing comfort over truth? And oh my gosh, I have a stack of things on my desk right now that really need me to be truthful about them and just get over the fact that they make me uncomfortable. So as soon as I click done on this video, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to that stack and I'm going to, even though it's uncomfortable, I'm going to push through. And I think I need to ask myself, where am I protecting things too much? Where am I afraid to act because I am afraid of what my actions will incite? When in fact, my actions that incite might actually be the right way through. You know, Tough times, I always say to my partner, in order to get through tough times, you have to go through them. It's kind of this joke. The only way through is through. The only way through is not around, it's not over, it's not under, it's through. So, how do we go through? And I want to be an effective leader, and that means I want to go through the discomfort because leadership has never been, nor will it ever be, about keeping things comfortable. It's about strategically creating those environments, those rooms where we can all do the real work, the honest work, the true work. And in my experience, the truth is rarely comfortable. In fact, the truth usually stings. That's what we need to be. We need to be leaders who understand the discomfort and recognize that the only way through is through. So I would encourage you to ask yourself some of those things this week. We're back on track with Feisty Fridays. I will see you again next Friday with a little bit more of my thoughts. Thank you for doing the journey with me. And like I said, I told you in Times Square that I'm working on a few things. I'm still working on those things. I'm working really diligently with an amazing creative team that's helping me put together, like, what do I mean when I say let's get feisty? What do I mean when I keep writing and kind of putting out into the universe my thoughts when in fact I am still doing the work? I'm not interested, nor have I ever been interested in creating something for the sake of creating something. Sharing me and my journey, absolutely. Mostly because I never did that. I never told my own truth. I had my own nice version of who Amber was. And being feisty is not about just being safe. It's about recognizing where there's opportunity for me to grow and learn and change. And that's what I want to do. So hang in there. I hope you have a wonderful week and think about where in your life are things maybe too comfortable because you've been protecting that comfort. Where can a little bit of discomfort welcomed in begin to move you and your thinking to something even greater? We'll see you next week.